Recording is on progress.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Explorations in ATLAS.ti webinar series. This is a joint project between ATLAS.ti, the University of British Columbia International Qualitative Research Toolkit out of Kelowna, British Columbia in Canada, and the School of Education Inquiry Methodology at Indiana University. My name is Juliana Barabbas. I'm going to be your moderator today. We're just doing a little bit of housekeeping before we start here at 9 o'clock, which is coming up quickly. Wanting to let everyone know that we'll be using the Q&A box to take all questions. And as soon as we finish our introductions, Julia and Ken, our presenters today, will speak for 40 to 45 minutes. Questions will come at the end. I'll read them on your behalf, and we do encourage you to ask any questions that you have in that Q&A, and looking forward to your responses. So I'm going to pass things over to Andrea now. Who is our ATLAS.ti representative. Andrea, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Juliana. I would like to welcome to the session of the Qualitative Methods Masterclass webinar series. My name is Andrea, and on behalf of Neringa Kalpokas, Director of ATLAS.ti, I am very pleased to announce that this series of webinars is organized by University of British Columbia and sponsored by ATLAS.ti, software for qualitative data analysis. The International Qualitative Research Toolkit, IQRT, offers two webinars, Exploration in ATLAS.ti and Insights in Qualitative Research Methods. In this series, we highlight innovative approaches and practices in qualitative data in ATLAS.ti and in qualitative methods in general. We strongly believe that sponsoring this project can help others researchers around the world with their research projects. Before I gave the microphone to the moderator of this session, I would like to just go through a few things about ATLAS.ti. If you're interested in learning the software, we offer free webinars on qualitative research, literature reviews, or ATLAS.ti in general. And also, just because you are participating today in this webinar, you deserve a special discount coupon for courses and licenses. Please, at the end of this webinar, just drop us an email and we will be pleased to offer you the coupon discount. This is everything from me. I'm going to pass the microphone to Juliana. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you also for that ongoing support. IQRT, International Qualitative Research Toolkit, was conceived in conjunction with the support of IIQM's Thinking Qualitatively conference, which Atlas also supported this last summer. Recordings are still available for that. On our first slide, you saw the web address for the IQRT as well. We have archives for both this Explorations and our Insight series that are available on that site as well. So if you have any other questions on that end of things, you know where to find us. So thank you again, Andrea. Our two presenters today, Julia Gluesing is a business and organizational anthropologist. Ken Riopelle is an engineer, and together as professional researchers have helped industries from car manufacturing to IT, as well as spearheading a National Science Foundation research project as professors, entrepreneurs, and business consultants. This husband and wife team have an impressive and innovative track record. They've been using ATLAS.ti, in fact, had their eye on it when it was still DOS-based. They've used every version since that point. They have focused primarily on global teaming and product development. It is absolutely an honor to have them join us today for strategies for data analysis using networks to obtain meaningful results. I'd like to please have you welcome Ken and Julia Gluesing and Ken Riopelle. Over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. We're really pleased to be here and to share what we have learned over the years about using ATLAS.ti, particularly using networks, and how the network view has helped us obtain meaningful results from our own data. So you've already learned a little bit about who we are. And our primary purpose today is to demonstrate two strategies for using ATLAS.ti Network View. And we're using two real-world projects to illustrate our techniques. And one of them is a theory-driven kind of top-down approach. And the other project illustrates more of a data-driven bottom-up approach.
One thing that when Julie and I were picking these projects, we thought, let's pick two classic projects that have stood the test of time. And so these are our selections. They are older, but we felt as though these represented really techniques that people can use ongoing and improve their worth over time.
Mm-hmm. So the first project was a National Science Foundation subcontract to an award that was given to the Greenfield Coalition for New Manufacturing Education. And this particular report dates back to 2004. And that's why we were able to share it with you. It's older and but still very, very relevant. And it is something that is now in the public domain. So that helped us also make that report available to you. We examined something we called shareable learning resources. And this was at a time when flash technologies had just been introduced into the marketplace. And the idea was to create little tidbits that could be used in the classroom to illustrate almost in a live simulation what goes on in a manufacturing floor, and different tools and processes that are used on the manufacturing floor. And we wanted to evaluate the use of these tools. The National Science Foundation had asked us to do that. And so we set about doing interviews with users and developers who were involved in the overall Greenfield study, which was quite large. It was a multi-million-dollar project involving several universities as a coalition. And so we interviewed a lot of the people involved in the creation of the shareable learning resources and also in their use. And we observed several of the tools being actually used in education. And we also did some secondary data analysis drawing on many of the documents that were created as part of this project. And these were our 5 primary research questions. We asked about the attributes of shareable learning resources and about perceptions that might affect the rate of their adoption. And we asked about how the shareable learning resources were communicated to people, and about the nature of the social system, what the network patterns were, and how those might impact the rate of adoption. And we were also concerned with understanding how the change agents and their efforts impacted the rate of adoption. And we used a socio-technical systems framework as well as general theory of diffusion of innovation from Everett Rogers that helped us certainly develop our research questions. And we really understood our research topic as being a systems topic, and affected very much by the interdependencies of technology, work process, the organizational structure and systems in which the technology was used, the people who were using it and who were also marketing it, and what the communication patterns were, as well as the influence of the larger environment or context. So our coding strategies, we developed really an initial code book based upon that diffusion of innovation theory. We used prefixes of F for factors, and we also used a prefix of M for the questions that we created in our interview protocol to try to get at the factors that were part of diffusion theory. And we added new codes as well that emerged from the data in the coding process, and we put a prefix of D in front of all of those. And then we created also in the network view unassigned codes that we used as labels, and we used the prefix of N to indicate that those were nodes that were created in the network view and not necessarily related to any of the text that we were analyzing, directly related. So that's a really nice thing about ATLAS.ti, is that you can create these unassigned codes. They don't have to be attached to a quotation.
So really what you're going to have here is the kind of the behind the scenes of how did we create this National Science Foundation report, and which is not in the report. It just says, here's the results, right? But now we're going to show you actually the ATLAS. We would call back that the hermeneutic unit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go through, and Julie's going to show up the codes and so on that we had. The 24 documents or interviews and data that we had. And from there, we'll give you a feel for how we went about, after doing these interviews and observations, to actually write the final report. So actually, you're going to get the final report, but in this webinar, you're actually going to see how we created the results.
So you can see here that we had 25 or 24 interview documents. We have a lot of codes. Most people will tell you probably that you should limit the number of codes that you have because they become unmanageable. But we use codes in a very different way, and we do a lot of fine level in vivo coding. And then we use the ATLAS.ti network view to help us organize those codes in a meaningful way. And so what you are looking at here is an example of a network that we created in response to one of the questions that we asked about what factors lead to adoption. And you can see the M there, which means question. That was an actual question on the interview protocol. And we had questions about administration, about the faculty, about content, students, the technology itself, and then how it was marketed. And from that, we created headings that reflected the data codes that we created in coding this particular question. So each interview was coded by question, as well as by the various codes you see here with the D in front of them. And when we brought the question code, the M09 factors leading to adoption code into the network view. And we asked ATLAS.ti to bring in all co-occurring codes. All of these codes then appeared in network view. All we had to do then was to organize them in a way that made conceptual sense. And for us, this is what we ended up with for the answer to this question, which then made it very easy to write up the report, because we had everything we needed in front of us. And if we wanted detailed quotes, we could go back to the documents themselves just by clicking on the codes. So this is an example of one of the network views. And you can see here.
Yeah, I was going to add to Julia, so that M was kind of a master code, because we had interviews with faculty, students, others. So we created M for me in a master one. And then the N's were all our higher level unassigned codes. As we looked at all these things, we just did this big sort and said, oh, this has to do with administration. These things have to do with faculty. So we sorted this kind of out, and then finally said, all right, these are our big 6 factors that go with administration, faculty, content, students, technology, and marketing, that it all had to do with factors that are leading to adoption or not. And a good example. So that's why we ended up with so many codes, and so many actually in vivo codes as well. We have 2 more examples to give you an idea. I think we have M10.
Sure.
Yeah. Barriers to adoption.
So here is another network view, barriers to adoption. You can see again that when we brought in all the co-occurring codes with that particular question, barriers to adoption, we were able to then organize them into categories that made conceptual sense. And then we put the N labels on them: the faculty barriers, content barriers, technology, student and university barriers. And again, it was very easy to understand the responses across all the interviews, and then to write them up in a meaningful way. So, you know, certainly faculty barriers had to do with faculty being aware of the shareable learning resources, and they had to shift their paradigm of teaching a little bit. And so that was an issue, and the fact that it took more time to use these tools in the classroom, and then simply the generation, how old the faculty member was, and affected their receptiveness to using tools like these shareable learning resources in the classroom, and whether or not they got any training, whether or not they were rewarded for what they did, etc. So you get the idea that it was pretty easy to make sense of the data this way when we used fine level coding, and then brought those codes in to a network view. One more example from this project. This was a particular question about what was needed to create wider use of these shareable learning resources. So again, the same thing. It made it very easy to understand factors related to community outreach, and to the technology characteristics themselves. What had to happen at the university level, what had to happen in terms of awareness, and in terms of getting faculty prepared to use these materials. So it was, again, an easy way to make sense of the data, especially for report writing.
I think now Julie's going to go back, and so we'll shift to our second example. So we'll have plenty of time to answer people's questions and go back here. Is taking the opposite way from the diffusion of innovation theory, a social technical theory, where we really had kind of a code book ready to start with. We had those characteristics of innovation, media, change agent that we're ready to look at in the data, to a completely different project. This was a proprietary custom industry consulting project that Julie and I did in the auto industry. It was about creating a knowledge base for product development teams. So I'll let Julia tell you, but this is really the opposite of just bottom up. We just had a few general interview questions that we started with, and I'll let her explain what we've done there to show the opposite of, well, just more of a data-driven, grounded up theory point of view.
So as Ken said, this was a consulting project, and we were trying to develop a knowledge base. In this particular company, there were executive coaches who were assigned to all the product development teams to help them with the people interactions that went along with their engineering. And these coaches all thought that their particular product development teams were very unique, and that they wouldn't have very much opportunity to learn from one another. But their manager had a different idea, and she had seen enough to understand that there indeed were patterns across all the product development teams. And so she asked us to go out and collect all the stories about the issues these coaches encountered in working with their product development teams, and how the coaches helped the teams resolve those issues. And so we went out and conducted semi-structured interviews with the executive coaches. They were very conversational, and we had all of those interviews transcribed, and we analyzed those interviews to create a hyperlinked knowledge base of all the issues, describing the conditions that existed in each of the cases, and what strategies or actions were taken by the executive coaches to help the teams resolve the issues, and that what consequences resulted from those actions and strategies. And then this whole knowledge base was then distributed or made available to all the coaches as an electronic knowledge base in a shared drive inside the company. So they benefited from it greatly until a big economic downturn in the auto industry, when the whole coaching staff was let go, unfortunately. But the project was a great one, and we still use these very same techniques today. Our coding strategies, based on Strauss and Corbin's grounded theory approach, we let the codes really emerge from the data, and then we group them according to the following categories: the conditions and context, strategies, actions, and consequences. And then we also group codes to reflect the local context. We group them by what particular phase in the product development cycle the issues occurred, and the overall context. And we also group them by the kinds of people who were involved in the issue, and then in resolving that issue. And we also took a look at team processes and tried to group codes according to how they related to the overall teaming that was going on. We used a lot of in vivo codes, and we tried to keep the results really grounded in the organizational language.
Yeah, just to add, these were roughly 90-minute to 2 hours interviews that were tape recorded, so they were quite long and extensive. Just to give you an idea of product development cycle, this is something maybe over 2 to 4 years that a new vehicle goes through, or a truck. And so it might start off with kickoff. Hey, you have a letter that says, here's our idea for a new vehicle. And then you kind of all the way go for several years as you go through the engineering cycle, finally until you get to launch and say, okay, it's in the plant, we're actually building the vehicle. So they're very, what they call stage gate pieces that we could bundle or segment or group the interviews around and actually provide that as a final report. So that was kind of background, and then we'll kind of show you the ATLAS piece here. Again, kind of behind the scenes of how we actually took those interviews and converted it to this knowledge base.
So I'll close this project and open up the other one. Okay. So you can see there were,
go on the right, you might say.
yeah, there were 17 documents, and we put them into 3 document groups. There's the 17 documents, the document groups. We had people who worked on pre-launch activity and launch and pre-launch. So their combo, and then each of those 2 sort of high level organizing labels for where the particular coaches were working at the time. We had 518 codes in this case, lots of them, and we put them into code groups. The code groups were again related to the context and the milestones in the product development process, as I said, and people and team processes. And we had 63 different networks that we created out of this. And I'm going to show you a couple of them.
So again, this is the whole idea that you're using in vivo codes. Ultimately, you're going to come up with something very detailed that can be very practically used with a fine grain of articulation. So again, it was always about, here's the context. Where are you in that product development cycle? What was the issue or strategy or problem that you were encountering? What did you use to try to resolve that? And what was the consequence, was the actual end result? So here's a good example here.
Right, and this is much more oriented to grounded theory. You can, it's not organized in categories as the codes were in the previous project. It's more according to grounded theory. If we had, one of the issues was that there was a lot of chaos around what the program was really about very early on in the product development process. There was constant change, and that created chaos around the program. And associated with that was the chief program engineer, assuming that he really, or she, mostly he in this case, didn't need to really communicate. And that led to people just trying to make sense of their environment and creating their own chaos, because they just didn't know. They didn't know what direction the program was going. And so these are really in vivo codes that we created. Not hearing anything in your mind feels like we know stuff is changing, just tell us. And given their experience on the program teams, they knew how much direction changed at any given minute. So there was a lot of chaos and changing direction. So the product development executive coach put together a strategy, put together a whole communication strategy. And these are all components of that communication strategy, a letter to the team, a feedback loop on the web, a team room where people could go in and take a look at the product and the latest and greatest news about where they were in addressing product development issues, creating a leadership team, and had an every other week meeting, one-on-ones that the chief program engineer started having with key people in the program. They created meetings for the different sub-teams and some norms around communication which didn't exist before. And they had all hands meetings when they brought everyone together. And then they also did some social activities, fun things like picnics. And all of those resulted in a consequence of greatly reduced uncertainty. So this is how we created the knowledge base, was building a number of network diagrams like this that helped us then write up what we were hearing in the stories.
So in essence, these 63 network maps were kind of restacked by the product development process, so where they fit in that kind of kickoff to launch. And then ultimately the coaches could say, oh yeah, I'm in this part of the process now, I just got assigned, here's where I'm joining the team. And they had a pretty good idea what the experience other coaches had did, what they tried, what was the consequence. So Joy has a few more, but in essence, having just a few interviews and having all those codes made it very, very easy to articulate and gave us a lot of credibility when we were actually presenting the results and they could actually use it. Here's another good example.
Yeah, and you could probably guess what company this is, but that's okay because it's old enough that it's outside the any kind of non-disclosure agreements that were signed. None of this exists anymore, so it's fine for us to show it to you. But this particular team was working on a global program, and bringing in Volvo and Mazda created a lot of complexity on that program, and that led to cross-cultural barriers. And associated with that was the need to learn each other's way of how they built a car. And so what they did was created a number of the coach helped to create a number of different strategies, creating a section in the newsletter about cultural differences, CCI coming in and observing patterns, and actually doing some training, and arranging social times for people to get together and learn about each other on an informal basis. They had a team picnic, coffee or dinner together, and they did a lot of things. These are some of the major things in this team to help clarify understandings and avoid potential misunderstandings, clarify cultural differences and similarities, and avoid misunderstandings. So this was another example of one of the issues that was encountered in the teams. Let's see another one here. Here's another chaos around the program. Again, this is not unusual early on in the product development cycle. There was, in this case, though, lack of alignment on the leadership team. And the chief program engineer and the functional managers had differing priorities that needed to be straightened out, and a condition that we called an intervening condition in this whole thing was delayed milestones. And So the number again of different strategies, holding meetings to do priority setting and action planning, providing individual feedback, and consequences of that, making a public commitment to work on their alignments, creating a level of ownership that they needed to do something more, and making a visible toolkit, more visible toolkit on what they were actually being measured on, and to get clear on what was happening in the program, they made a matrix. All of these things were consequences. Some people did their own work just based on the feedback they got, the one-on-one feedback. And the feedback in and of itself leads people to do things differently.
So we just do one more here, and then I think we can have plenty of time for the last 20 minutes for questions and so on that you have, just to give an idea of what we saw, that you could have a lot of codes you could have for this detail in this case, for both cases, and use the in vivo and the network view to actually kind of organize a coherent write-up of the report.
And so just by using the network view and bringing in co-occurring codes and neighbors, and when the codes are quite long in vivo codes, you really can get a good idea of what's going on. And in this particular view, we're looking at the organizational factors that were blocking the team from achieving potential. And many of those were hierarchy and autocratic nature of the company, and some objectives that may not have been set as something feasible to obtain. They were incompatible and infeasible, and people didn't feel empowered to say no. And they felt they didn't have the ability to speak openly and honestly with issues that existed. So these kinds of conditions then led the coaches to create team days, and that brought in people from Mazda, and who actually did do a lot of talking about Japanese culture and how they were helping to create something new in the team. And these team days created a much more comfortable environment for people to speak out, and for working on the team functioning. And they actually had marketing come up with something to get the team to focus on the importance of the customer, and showing customers the clay, showing the team the clay. That's the actual design of the car before it ever gets built. So lots of things that were done in this team and facilitated by the coach to help overcome the organizational factors they felt were getting in the way.
So why don't we stop here, there, and I think we just had a few final things and answer your questions and go back to any of this. Again, the NSF report is available for you to see. That's public. We cannot share, even though our non-disclosure, of the proprietary report, but I think you get a feeling for how we went about doing the interviews, writing up, coding it in the ATLAS. And in our case, we had the benefit of having these tape recorded. So we had some really good interview notes here.
Yeah, and good rich stories, and a lot of codes that could provide a descriptive detail that we managed using network views. And the pictures of the conditions, the strategies and actions, and the consequences related to the different contexts really helped us understand how the issues were impacting work and what could be done about those issues and how to share those across the coaching network. And we were able to write up the results that were grounded with a lot of credibility so that the people that were using the knowledge base could really understand it and identify with it. And they were valuable communication and sense-making tools. The network maps themselves were that.
Actually, the network maps were included in the report along with the scripts for every one of those pieces. They had that. And actually the coaches used that as a further tool to say, okay, what else could be going on? There's another strategy to use. What about this? So they were actually brainstorming tools afterwards used by the coaches.
Yeah, they were in a sense boundary objects that help them communicate in the teams. So
okay,
that's
I think
it.
Giuliani, questions, other things that we can answer for the audience.
Thank you both so much for that. I'm sure that we will have some questions. I have not seen any questions pop up in our Q&A as of yet. So if anyone would like to just pop their question into, there should be a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please do fire away any questions. In the meantime, I will ask a question.
Okay.
So I'm getting the impression from the way that you talked about your projects that it was primarily the two of you that were driving, coding, all of that. How would you say the methodologies, the strategies that you used with these networks and coding would work across bigger teams? Do you think it
Well,
would be?
we actually did work with a bigger team. It wasn't only the two of us. We had graduate assistants working with us in the case of the NSF project, and we had another person also working with us on the coding. So we were all doing team coding, and I've done projects like this where I've had, you know, like 6 people all doing coding on a particular set of interviews. In one instance, we had a whole team working in 3 different manufacturing plants, and everyone was doing interviews and gathering data, and then doing their own coding of their particular data sets. But we had to merge them all, and we had to agree on what the coding strategy was. We had regular meetings. We had a master document, and I was in charge of that. But we had everybody working on their own coding, and we did a lot of coding together initially to make sure that we were quote unquote all on the same page in our coding strategy and our understanding of what we had to do. So it works quite well with teams, the same strategy.
Just to add to that, we had another National Science Foundation project with other colleagues in Texas, and the graduate student was in Oklahoma. We were in California at the time. And there we used Amazon Web Services. And actually, we just put the Amazon database on Amazon Web Services. And
the ATLAS database.
The ATLAS database on Amazon Web Services, sorry. And we used that. So we actually had a single license that people use. So we got around the idea of merging. All right. The only thing we had to do, be careful, you only could have one person on that service at a time. But they worked out, we'll text each other, hey, is anybody on? So you didn't get kicked off. So that was a second way of teamwork. And it was small, you know, you're only looking at about 6 people. But that was small enough for 6 of us to use a single laptop, basically a PC in the cloud to do our coding.
And that was pre-ATLAS.ti cloud. I
Right,
mean,
yeah, it was pretty.
so
right.
now there's ATLAS.ti cloud. So
Yes, yes. And actually our previous explorations presenters back in September 28th did talk about cloud versus more dedicated Atlas. So interesting for those of you who have interest in
Right.
that, take a look at our archive. We do have a number of comments and questions that have popped up in the Q&A. So I'm just going to start these from Carlene. She says, or they say, thank you for an incredible presentation. You made the processes I've experienced as happening quite innate and so visible and tangible. So a thank you. What advice, however, do you have for starting out with a network? I sometimes experience being stumped with, where do I start? And then she's got a couple of other questions after that, but if you'd like to start with that.
Well, in the case of our first project we presented, our starting point was a question. For example, we had the question about related to the barriers that people were encountering in using the shareable learning resources. And so every response to every one of the questions in our interview protocol was coded with a question number. So, it was very easy for us to bring that question number as the initial starting point into the network view and then bring in the co-occurring codes. And so that made it very, very easy. But that was different in the second project because we didn't have that kind of coding of the responses by question. We took a look at what seemed to be patterns that we were hearing, what were really frequently used codes, like chaos around the program definition or at the launch was something that people mentioned a lot. And so we said, okay, this is something important. Let's bring that code in and see what co-occurs with it. And so for us, doing co-occurrence or coding that way, because you have to code that way. Some people think that they can't double code a segment of text, but for us, that's one of the most valuable aspects of ATLAS.ti is that you can see many different things going on in a single response and take and code that single response, different segments of text in that response with a different code that really reflects what somebody is saying. And then you can maybe say, well, this whole thing has to do with chaos and chaos around the program definition, but these are different aspects of that chaos that get coded independently. So you bring in chaos around the definition and then the co-occurring codes, and there you go. So it's you have to pay attention to your data and to the primary themes, the primary things that are coming up in the data, and that should be reflected in the groundedness of your codes. And then, those codes that are really grounded, they probably have something to say, and they can be complicated. So you can bring those. That to me, I find that's a great starting point.
Another one, just to add to Julia back, we've had other people do interviews and they have questions that say, oh, the interviewer skipped and went back to another question, right? So I say, if you have a transcript or something like that, it's okay, just recode that kind of response back to that same question. So having those question numbers, and it doesn't matter that they're exactly in order, they can jump around. We also found it's okay.
Yeah. This response really relates to question 1, not to question 5. We have asked question 5, but the respondent is actually replying to question 1. And so, you coded question 1. So it's and in that way, you don't have to be rigid in your protocols. You can make the interviews conversational. You can allow for serendipitous interesting points to arise and still code in a systematic way that helps you build the networks. But, you know,
We hope that answers that
That's the
question.
question.
There's more underneath that.
yeah.
So responses are popping up in Q&A as you've been speaking, and our person who asked the question did just confirm, yes, you have answered all my questions, but I will relay some comments. She had asked, in addition, working deductively, as with example 1, it seems that the network strongly correlated with the research questions, which you confirmed.
Yes.
How did you go about example 2 to build and enlighten the understandings created by the networks, which you've explained? So thank you. She's also noting great explanations of teamwork and how to navigate the system abilities, and a brilliant explanation of starting, building, and coding what it is you want to explore using multiple codes per quote to unpack the meaning. I'm hearing lots of potential for capturing nuance.
Yes,
That's
exactly right. Because if you code, you have 30 or codes or 50 codes and they're just super high level. It's like you have to go back and read every single quotation to figure out what is really going on. And you can do that if you have a small data set. But if you have a big data set, and we've had some really big ones, we have found that it is just super valuable to code at a micro level and to code in vivo. And it doesn't matter that you have a whole lot of codes, as long as you can you can group them, and as long as you can relate them to some higher order factor, right?
Wonderful. So I'm just going to give people another moment here if there are any other further questions. So on coding and in vivo, it's coming.
Yeah.
I think she's in process with this question.
Okay.
Give her a second here. I'll give them a second. I have to stop my assumptions. Yeah. Carlene, did you have a question in relating to coding and in vivo? We may be looking at a bit of lag here in responses. Yes. How do you keep track of volume? I know you're speaking to grouping codes, but there can be so many.
Let me see if I can go back to my ATLAS.ti and share.
So as an example, they also asked, do you use prefixes that go beyond the 1-letter examples?
Yes. Let's take a look at the codes here. So they're obviously alphabetical, but I also used,
well, like, say you say CPE, we had a number of different things that related to topic.
Yeah, FPDS. LR.
It seems like with this much data, you're almost creating your own language structure around your codes.
You are.
Well,
And but I also had, maybe the other project will show it better. Let's see.
Yeah, I think we have used different ones, especially we've done some with networks where we had, and actually a doctoral student that was looking at African-American migration from the South to the North in Michigan and Saginaw. And he had a number of codes that depicted where they originated from, where they ended up, but also in the network diagram, he actually then said this person relates to this person, they're part of this group. So he had a lot of prefixes that went along with their sociability, their work, that they work at this particular plant, where they're a member of this church. So depending on the project that we've used. But in the larger case, that one, the very first one, we used M for master question. And then for the data and
Yeah, things like this.
also problem solving.
Cheating. So all the problem codes, all the skill codes, all the quality codes go together.
And I think that speaks to the next comment that they made, which was, since the codes are alphabetical, they find too many in vivo codes can require a lot of housekeeping to track. They use the search function to use particular words or phrases that cut across the alphabetical issues of codes being separated by many codes in between.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Agreement across the board.
Yeah.
And we also, often use
the search function.
That frequency to actually say, well, what is being said across everything, right? And to use the now search and code, right? It used to be the auto coding function.
Yeah.
And say, all right.
And often we will begin the project by doing a I'll stop share.
Yeah, here we are.
Okay, I will begin a project by just doing, the word list, ATLAS.ti's frequency list of all the words in the documents, and finding those that seem to be key, and then using those as kind of categories to begin my coding. I will do that.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like a great visual tool to add to the whole process and structure. So we're getting close to time. While people are thinking about any other questions, I'm also going to share my screen and just thank you both so very much. And I'll take a moment to also, and yes, thank you for such insights and practical explanations, that's what Explorations is all about, getting into the practicalities of these tools.
We're all for pragmatism.
Yeah, right. Does it work?
Absolutely. Does it work?
Grounded in real world, right?
Yeah.
There we have it. So I'm going to share my screen here for a second, just to highlight that we do have some other presentations that are upcoming in these series, and I'll keep an eye. Whoops, I got ahead of myself. Upcoming in October, we have Insights in Qualitative Methodologies, our partner series to this series. October 26th, we've got Dr. Joe Norris talking about dramatizing the data for dialogic dissemination, a little bit of alliteration in this one. Joe Norris is a professor emeritus from Brock University who's been working with a qualitative method for theatrical exploration called play building. Very engaging speaker, and I highly encourage anyone who has interest in performance and visual methodologies to check that one out. We also have another Explorations webinar coming up that, not dissimilar to this one, coding large amounts of data, text data, Dr. Gerben Moorman out of the University of Amsterdam, but he's going to be talking more about automation and collaboration and using those in conjunction with each other. So we've got a title to come for November 25th for Dr. Moorman. We've also got a couple of other researchers that are coming up that I'm going to mention without titles, but still of note. November 10th in qualitative or Insights in Qualitative Methodologies. Vivek Valanki and Tran Templeton from Indiana University are going to be talking about visual methodologies. Dr. Selena Richter, who's the new Dean of Nursing at the University of Saskatchewan, and her collaborator, Dr. Kimberly Jarvis, are going to be talking about qualitative research in international settings, November 17th. And on November 30th, we'll be doing a webinar out of California, Dr. Robert Kozinets talking about netnography. So a few things to highlight. And we do have, of course, another question that's come up. Anyone who's wanting to register for these upcoming webinars, you'll find information at our website as listed below. Again, a thank you. We are also, and I'll just stop sharing there for a moment. We do have a couple of more comments. Are we able to get access to the previous? Yes, expiration presentations are in our archive. Please do check out, if you go to our main IQRT site, you'll see that there is an archive section that you can click into. When you go to that page, both the insights and explorations archives are both available. And good to hear that one of you has worked with Dr. Richter as well. So again, my thanks to ATLAS.ti, and thank you for putting your contact information up. This is
Anybody
perfect
that
way
wants
for us to cap. If there
we're
are
happy to
questions,
answer.
yes, sorry.
Happy to answer questions.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Wonderful. Again, thank you so much for your insights and practical, pragmatic breakdown of these huge projects. It's a great insight into how to grapple with these issues. I want to thank ATLAS.ti again. I'm not sure if we're going to have, and there we are.
There she is.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ringa and Andrea from ATLAS.ti. And again, for those of you that attended, don't forget about your code that you can use, the discount code that you can use for attending today. And I thank you again, Ken and Julia, for joining us, and hope that we cross paths again soon.
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Check out our archives,
Thank
and we'll
you.
hopefully see some folks on October 26th as well.
Okay. Thanks
All right.
very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.